It was just another ordinary Tuesday morning when Dr. Chen's coffee cup started vibrating on her desk. At first, she thought it was just another minor tremor, pretty common in this part of Japan. But something felt different this time. The readings on her monitoring equipment were like nothing she'd ever seen before. "Hey, take a look at this," she called out to her research partner, pointing at the strange patterns dancing across the screen. The waves weren't random like normal earthquakes. They had a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Working at the Pacific Deep Sea Research Center had its exciting moments, but this was something else entirely. The patterns kept showing up day after day, always at the same time, always with the same weird signature. It was like someone was playing drums with the Earth's crust. Dr. Chen couldn't shake the feeling that she was onto something big. She spent nights poring over the data, comparing it with every known type of seismic activity. Nothing matched. Not volcanic activity, not tectonic plate movements, not even underground testing. This was something new. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was 3 a.m. when her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. "Dr. Chen speaking," she answered, trying to sound awake. The voice on the other end was crisp and official. "Dr. Chen, this is Admiral Yamamoto from the Japanese Defense Force. We need to talk about your recent findings. In person, today." Before she knew it, she was being escorted through underground levels of a military facility she never knew existed. The walls were lined with screens showing similar patterns to the ones she'd been studying, but these were clearly being monitored and controlled. "What you've discovered," the Admiral explained, leading her through a massive blast door, "is something we've been working on for the past decade." The door opened to reveal a command center buzzing with activity. Scientists and military personnel moved purposefully between stations, all focused on a massive central display showing what looked like an underwater vessel, but unlike anything she ever seen. "We call it the Human Earthquake Battleship Program," the Admiral continued. "And those patterns you've been tracking, those were our test runs." Dr. Chen's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. They had actually built a ship that could control seismic waves. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about military power. This technology could revolutionize how we understand and interact with our planet's core systems. But as she was about to ask more questions, alarms started blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as personnel rushed to their stations. On the main screen, something new appeared. A series of objects entering the solar system, moving in formation, definitely not natural and definitely not from Earth. "Dr. Chen," the Admiral's voice was grave now, "we were developing this technology as a defensive measure. We never imagined we'd need to use it so soon. But those objects up there? They're not friendly, and they're heading straight for us." She looked around the room, at the faces of the people who'd been working on this secret project for years. They'd created something extraordinary, something that might be humanity's best chance against whatever was coming from the stars. And now she was part of it too. The coffee cup on her desk seemed like a lifetime ago. As she watched the incoming data about the approaching objects, she realized this was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would change not just her life, but the course of human history. The next few hours were a blur of briefings, security clearances, and mind-bending revelations. But one thing was clear: her expertise would be crucial in understanding how to use this technology effectively. The human earthquake battleship wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to unlocking secrets about our planet that nobody had even imagined existed. And they were running out of time to master it. 10 years earlier, in a dimly lit conference room deep beneath Tokyo, a group of scientists and military officials gathered around a table scattered with papers and coffee cups. One scientist, Dr. Tanaka, stood at the front of the room, his hands shaking slightly as he clicked through his presentation. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a video of underwater volcanic activity. "We've been thinking about earthquakes all wrong. They're not just destructive forces, they're energy waiting to be harnessed." Nobody laughed. Nobody called him crazy, because sitting in front of each person was a folder stamped with Project Genesis, containing proof that his wild idea might actually work. The Japanese Defense Force had been searching for a new way to protect their islands. Traditional weapons seemed outdated in a world where threats could come from anywhere, even space. But what if they could use the very thing that had always threatened Japan, seismic activity, and turn it into their greatest defense. The early tests were rough. The first prototype was barely bigger than a submarine and kept breaking down. The engineering team worked around the clock, fueled by instant noodles and determination. They lost 3 test vessels before they finally figured out how to contain the massive energy they were playing with. "It's like trying to bottle lightning," one engineer explained to his wife, who thought he was working on a regular naval project. "Except the lightning is underground, and the bottle has to move through water." The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A young researcher was watching her daughter play with soap bubbles in the backyard. The way the bubbles maintained their shape while floating through the air sparked an idea. What if they could create a bubble of controlled energy around the ship? That's when Project Genesis really took off. They'd built a vessel unlike anything the world had seen before. From the outside, it looked almost organic, with a hull that rippled like muscle under skin. Inside, it was a marvel of technology and human ingenuity. The ship didn't just move through water, it communicated with the Earth itself. Special sensors could read the smallest tremors, while powerful generators could create controlled seismic pulses. It was like having a conversation with the planet's core. But keeping it secret wasn't easy. Locals near the testing site reported strange waves and unexplained tremors. The cover story about underwater research barely held up. Every successful test had to be carefully timed to coincide with natural seismic activity. The project leaders held their breath during each test run. One wrong calculation could trigger a real earthquake. They developed fail-safes upon fail-safes, backup systems for their backup systems. The responsibility weighed heavy on everyone involved. Training the crew was another challenge entirely. They needed people who could think in 3 dimensions while feeling the Earth's movements in their bones. Traditional naval experience wasn't enough. They needed something more, almost like dancers who could feel the rhythm of the planet. The ship's control room looked nothing like a normal bridge. Instead of a steering wheel, there was something that looked more like a musical instrument crossed with a meditation chamber. Operators had to learn to become one with the ship's systems, to feel the seismic waves as naturally as they felt their own heartbeat. Each successful test brought them closer to their goal, but also raised new questions. How would this technology change warfare? Could it be used to prevent natural disasters? The ethical debates were as heated as the technical discussions. As news of strange ocean phenomena started spreading online, the project leaders knew they were running out of time to perfect their creation. They needed to master this technology before someone else figured out what they were doing. Or worse, before they actually needed to use it. Little did they know that high above Earth's atmosphere, they weren't the only ones making preparations for an encounter that would change everything. The clock was ticking, not just for Project Genesis, but for all of humanity. The ship was ready. The crew was trained. Now they just needed to hope they'd never have to use it. But somewhere in the vast darkness of space, decisions were being made that would put all their hard work to the ultimate test. It started with a blip on a screen at the International Space Observatory. The night shift operator almost missed it, distracted by his lukewarm coffee. But there it was again. Movement at the edge of our solar system, too ordered to be natural. He rubbed his eyes, double-checked the readings, then picked up the red phone. Within hours, observatories worldwide were tracking the same phenomenon. Something was out there, and it was heading straight for Earth. At first, they tried to keep it quiet. But you can't hide a fleet of massive objects moving through space, not when every amateur astronomer with a decent telescope could spot them. Social media exploded with theories. News channels ran endless speculations. The stock market wobbled as uncertainty spread. In the underground command center of the human earthquake battleship project, the atmosphere was electric. Technicians rushed between stations, updating systems and running diagnostics. They'd been preparing for a threat, but nobody had expected it to come from above. "Show me the latest trajectory analysis," demanded the project director, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The main screen lit up with a plot showing the object's path. They were moving with purpose, adjusting course in ways that proved beyond doubt. These weren't asteroids or space debris. The objects were massive, each one bigger than anything humans had ever put in space. They moved in perfect formation, like a fleet of warships. But what really sent chills down everyone's spine was how they adjusted their course to avoid detection by Earth's early warning systems. They knew we were here, and they knew our capabilities. Messages started coming in from military commands worldwide. Everyone wanted to know, what were we going to do? Traditional weapons seemed pointless against visitors who could cross interstellar space. The human earthquake battleship might be Earth's only real defense, but it had never been tested against anything like this. In a secure conference room, world leaders gathered virtually to discuss the situation. The Japanese Prime Minister finally revealed what his country had been developing. There was shock, anger, and then, as the reality of the situation sank in, desperate hope. "We have no choice but to trust this technology," said one leader, voicing what everyone was thinking. "But can it work against something that's not even on Earth?" The project scientists had been asking themselves the same question. They designed the ship to manipulate seismic waves in water, but could those same principles be applied to create waves that could affect objects in space? They had days, maybe weeks, to figure it out. Meanwhile, the public was beginning to panic. Despite government's best efforts to project calm, people could sense something big was coming. Streets in major cities emptied as families stocked up on supplies and headed for rural areas. The internet was flooded with goodbye messages and last-minute confessions. But in the midst of the fear, something remarkable happened. People started coming together. Old rivalries were forgotten as nations pooled their resources and knowledge. Scientists shared classified research, trying to understand what they were facing. Deep beneath the ocean, the human earthquake battleship hummed with power as engineers made modifications for the coming battle. They were no longer testing or practicing. This was real. Every adjustment, every calculation could mean the difference between Earth's survival and, well, nobody wanted to think about the alternative. Satellite images showed the alien fleet passing Mars, their massive ships casting shadows on the red planet's surface. They weren't hiding anymore. It was as if they wanted us to see them coming, to know what we were facing. Back in the command center, someone had posted a photo of Earth taken from space, that famous blue marble shot that showed how fragile our planet really was. Below it, they'd written, "Worth fighting for." The countdown had begun. In less than a month, humanity would face its greatest test. The human earthquake battleship, built to defend against earthly threats, would have to prove itself against something far beyond its designer's wildest dreams. As the alien fleet drew closer, one question hung in everyone's minds. Would our greatest scientific achievement be enough to save us from what was coming? The selection process for commanding Earth's most advanced weapon wasn't anything like traditional military appointments. They needed someone special, someone who could think differently. That's how they found Commander Tanaka, though she wasn't a commander yet when they discovered her. She was teaching advanced geology at a university in Osaka, known for her unconventional theories about how seismic waves could be used to map underground structures. Her students called her the Wave Whisperer because she could often predict tremors before they registered on equipment. The day two government officials showed up in her classroom, she thought she was in trouble for her latest research paper. Instead, they showed her something that made her controversial theories look tame in comparison. "We've been watching your work," one official said, laying out classified documents about the human earthquake battleship. "You understand something that most people don't, that the Earth isn't just a rock we live on. It's alive in its own way, and it has patterns we can work with." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. This was exactly what she'd been theorizing about, but taken to a level she hadn't imagined possible. When they offered her the position, she didn't hesitate. The training facility was hidden in plain sight, a marine research center on a small island. Her first view of the battleship took her breath away. It was beautiful in a strange way, like a whale made of metal and dreams. "The ship responds to intuition as much as commands," her instructor explained. "You need to feel the waves, not just direct them." This was where Tanaka's unique background came in handy. She'd spent years studying how seismic waves interacted, how they could be predicted and possibly guided. The first time she sat in the command chair, something clicked. The neural interface that connected her to the ship's systems felt natural, like it had been waiting for her. While other candidates struggled to maintain basic wave patterns, she was already experimenting with complex frequencies. It's like conducting an orchestra, she told her team during training. But instead of musicians, we're conducting the Earth's own energy. Her enthusiasm was contagious. The crew, hand-picked from various backgrounds, started to see the ship the way she did, not as a weapon, but as an instrument for communicating with the planet itself. There were setbacks, of course. During one test, she pushed too hard and triggered a minor tremor that rattled windows in a nearby town. She spent that night reviewing data, determined to find the perfect balance between power and control. The crew became more than just a team. They were pioneers exploring a new frontier of science. Each person brought their own perspective: geologists, engineers, military tacticians, even a former concert pianist who helped develop a more intuitive interface for controlling seismic frequencies. Then came the news about the alien fleet. Suddenly, their training took on new urgency. They weren't just experimenting anymore. They were preparing for a battle that would determine Earth's fate. Tanaka spent long hours in the simulator, running through every possible scenario. How would seismic waves behave when directed upward? Could they affect objects in orbit? The science was theoretical, but they didn't have time for theories anymore. "We need to think beyond traditional combat," she told her crew during a briefing. "We're not just fighting against an enemy, we're working with our planet to defend itself." This perspective shifted their entire approach to training. The pressure was immense. Everyone knew they were the last line of defense if conventional weapons failed. But instead of cracking under the pressure, Tanaka's team grew stronger. They developed their own language for describing wave patterns, created new techniques for manipulating seismic energy. As the alien fleet drew closer, the crew's family members were moved to secure locations. The night before they were scheduled to take up their battle position, Tanaka walked the ship's corridors, checking on her people. She found them calm, focused, ready. Looking out through the underwater viewing ports, watching bioluminescent creatures drift past, Tanaka felt a deep connection to both the ship and the Earth itself. Whatever was coming from space, they would face it together, not just as a crew, but as representatives of their entire planet. They were as ready as they could be. Now they just had to prove that humanity's most ambitious project could stand up against whatever the universe had in store for them. The South Pacific was calm the morning the training began, but everyone knew that wouldn't last long. The human earthquake battleship floated silently beneath the waves, its crew ready for their first full power test. They'd practiced in simulators, but this was different. This was real. Starting with basic wave pattern alpha, Commander Tanaka announced from the control center. Her hands moved across the neural interface, feeling the connection between ship and sea. The first tremor was gentle, barely a ripple in the ocean above them. The crew watched their instruments carefully. Each person had trained for months for this moment, learning to read not just their displays, but the supple vibrations that ran through the ship's hull. They weren't just operators anymore, they were becoming part of something bigger. Increasing power to 20%, Tanaka called out. The ship hummed louder, and they could feel the energy building. Deep beneath them, the Earth's crust responded to their commands. It was like waking a sleeping giant, carefully and respectfully. Their first challenge was creating controlled tremors that could disrupt specific targets without causing widespread damage. They used decommissioned ships as practice targets, trying to disable them without sinking them. It wasn't easy. Too much power. Someone shouted during an early attempt. The target ship had nearly capsized from the unexpected wave. Tanaka adjusted quickly, finding the right frequency to stabilize the water. They learned from every mistake, refined their technique with each try. The breakthrough came during their third week of training. They discovered that by layering different frequencies of seismic waves, they could create patterns that moved through water like invisible hands. The crew called them ghost fingers, capable of reaching out and touching targets with incredible precision. But precision wasn't enough. They needed power too. The aliens weren't going to be as fragile as Earth ships. Each day, they pushed the limits a little further, learning how much the ship could take, how much the Earth would give. One day, during a particularly intense session, something unexpected happened. As they generated a powerful seismic pulse, the water around them began to glow with bioluminescence. The sea life was responding to their energy in ways nobody had predicted. "Look at this data," one of the scientists said, pointing to her screen. The marine life isn't running away from our waves, they're dancing with them. This discovery led to a complete rethinking of how they operated. Instead of fighting against nature, they learned to work with it. The training wasn't just about the ship anymore. The crew had to learn to read the ocean itself, its currents, its temperatures, the way sound moved through different layers of water. They studied weather patterns, underwater geography, anything that might give them an advantage. Some days were harder than others. Equipment broke down, crew members got sick from the constant motion, and there were always new problems to solve. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that Earth's future might depend on their success. During breaks, the crew would gather in the mess hall, sharing stories and jokes, becoming more than just colleagues. They celebrated small victories and supported each other through failures. Someone started a tradition of naming their different wave patterns after mythological creatures. "This one moves like a dragon," a young operator said, demonstrating a particularly powerful combination of waves. The name stuck, and soon they had a whole menagerie of seismic creatures at their command. As their skills improved, they began practicing more complex maneuvers. They learned to create standing waves that could shield an area from attack, developed techniques for focusing seismic energy into precise points, and even found ways to use the ocean floor as an amplifier for their power. The most challenging part was learning to work together as one unit. Each person's actions affected everyone else. A slight miscalculation in one section could ripple through the entire operation. They had to trust each other completely. By the time their training period was nearing its end, the human earthquake battleship had become more than just a weapon or a ship. It was a symbol of what humans could achieve when they worked together with each other and with nature itself. The alien fleet was still coming, but now Earth had a defense that no one could have imagined just a few years ago. As Commander Tanaka watched her crew run through their final practice drills, she felt a mix of pride and anticipation. They were ready for whatever came next, or at least, they hoped they were. The first attack came at dawn. The alien ships appeared suddenly, breaking through the clouds over Tokyo Bay like massive dark stars fallen from the sky. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly metal that seemed to drink in the sunlight. In the control room of the human earthquake battleship, warning lights flashed as sensors picked up the energy signatures of weapons powering up. Commander Tanaka gripped her neural interface controls tighter, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "All stations, battle positions," she ordered. The crew moved with practiced precision, months of training kicking in. They were 300 meters beneath the surface, hidden in the depths they'd learned to call home. The first alien blast hit the water, sending shockwaves that the crew felt even at their depth. On the surface, waves rose higher than buildings. Cities along the coast had been evacuated days ago, but watching the destructive power of these weapons made everyone grateful for that decision. "Ready primary wave sequence," Tanaka commanded. This was the moment they'd trained for. The ship's systems hummed to life, connecting with the Earth's crust below. They could feel the power building, like a giant taking a deep breath. The alien ships were moving into position, spreading out across the bay. They clearly expected resistance from above. Missiles, aircraft, the usual human defenses. They weren't looking down. Nobody ever looked down. "Wave pattern dragon, full power," Tanaka called out. Her hands moved across the controls in a complex dance they'd practiced countless times. Deep beneath the seafloor, energy began to build. The first seismic wave hit the alien ships like an invisible hammer. The water beneath their massive hulls suddenly became solid as stone, then liquid again, then solid. Their shields flickered with strange lights as they tried to compensate for an attack unlike anything they'd encountered before. One of the smaller alien ships tilted dangerously as its stabilizers failed to cope with the constantly changing forces. Its shields sparked and fizzled, clearly not designed to handle this kind of assault. "They're adjusting their shield frequencies," called out the sensor operator. "But they can't seem to lock onto our pattern." There was excitement in his voice. Their theories had been right. The aliens weren't prepared for this type of warfare. The battle intensified as more alien ships joined the fight. They fired energy weapons into the water, trying to find their hidden attacker. But the crew had trained for this too. They used the seismic waves to deflect the energy, channeling it harmlessly into the Earth's crust. "Pattern Leviathan," Tanaka ordered, initiating their strongest attack sequence. The entire ship vibrated as they generated waves powerful enough to create temporary underwater mountains. Two alien ships, caught in the uplift, crashed into each other as the water beneath them literally rose into the air. The crew worked seamlessly together, each person anticipating the other's needs. They'd become more than a team. They were a single organism, moving with the rhythm of the waves they controlled. But the aliens were quick learners. Their ships began to adapt, adjusting their positions to minimize the impact of the seismic attacks. One particularly large vessel managed to lock onto their position, its weapons charging for a direct strike. "Evasive pattern Hydra," Tanaka shouted. The battleship moved like a living thing, riding the waves it generated to slide away from the aliens' targeting system. They could feel the heat of the enemy's weapon as it sliced through the water where they'd been moments before. The battle had become a dance, a deadly ballet of energy weapons and seismic waves. The alien ships moved with incredible grace for their size, but they couldn't match the human earthquake battleship's connection to the ocean itself. Hours passed like minutes. The crew was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd stood up against an alien invasion force and held their own. More than that, they'd shocked them, disrupted their carefully planned attack. As the sun set on that first day of combat, the alien fleet pulled back to regroup. They'd lost 3 ships to the seismic attacks, and several others showed signs of severe damage. It was a victory, but everyone knew it was only the beginning. Looking at the sensor readings of the retreating ships, Commander Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had surprised them today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had proven that Earth wouldn't be such an easy target after all. The second day of battle dawned with an eerie calm. The alien fleet had regrouped during the night, and now they were back, with new tactics. Their ships moved differently, hovering closer to the water's surface, their shields shimming with strange new patterns. "They've modified their shields," reported the sensor officer, his voice tense. "The frequency is completely different from yesterday." The entire crew of the human earthquake battleship felt the weight of this development. Their previous tactics might not work anymore. Commander Tanaka studied the readings carefully. The aliens had adapted faster than anyone expected. Their shield modifications seemed specifically designed to disperse seismic energy. They'd learned from their losses yesterday. The first hit caught everyone by surprise. A new type of weapon, something that sent shockwaves through the water like artificial earthquakes. The battleship rocked violently, warning lights flashing across every console. "They're using our own tricks against us," someone shouted over the noise of straining metal. The aliens had clearly studied yesterday's battle and developed countermeasures. Now they were turning the ocean itself into a weapon. "All hands, brace for impact," Tanaka called out as another blast approached. This one was even stronger, pushing them dangerously close to their hull's pressure limits. The crew could hear the metal groaning around them. The battle quickly turned into a desperate fight for survival. The alien ships coordinated their attacks, creating wave patterns that threatened to tear the battleship apart. Every time the crew tried to generate their own seismic waves, the enemy's new shields simply absorbed the energy. Engineering reports microfractures in the outer hull, called out the damage control officer. "We can't take much more of this kind of punishment." The situation was becoming critical. They needed to think of something new and fast. That's when the youngest member of the crew, a brilliant engineer fresh out of university, noticed something odd about their sensor readings. "Commander, look at this pattern," she said, pointing to her screen. "Their shields might be stronger, but they're using massive amounts of energy to maintain them." Tanaka saw it too. The aliens had sacrificed efficiency for power. Their new defense systems were incredibly strong but required constant energy input to maintain. A plan began to form in her mind. "What if we don't try to break through their shields?" she asked her crew. "What if we make them break themselves?" It was risky. They'd have to intentionally take hits while executing their plan. But they were running out of options. The next hour was the most intense yet. The battleship moved in closer to the alien fleet, appearing to struggle against their attacks. But really, they were watching, measuring, calculating. Each hit they took revealed more about the enemy's energy patterns. "Pattern matching complete," announced the science officer. Their shield frequency has a rhythm to it, like a heartbeat. This was what they needed. Instead of fighting against the alien shields, they could work with them, amplify them until they overloaded. Tanaka initiated their new strategy. The battleship began generating seismic waves that matched the aliens' shield frequency perfectly. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the enemy shields started to glow brighter and brighter. "Their power readings are off the charts," reported the sensor officer. "They're trying to compensate, but they can't break the resonance pattern." The alien ships began to pull back, but it was too late. Their own shields had become a trap. The first ship's shields collapsed in a spectacular display of light and energy. Then another and another. The aliens tried to shut down their defense systems, but the resonance pattern had created a feedback loop they couldn't control. But victory came at a cost. The human earthquake battleship's systems were dangerously overloaded from maintaining the complex wave patterns. Warning lights flashed across every station as backup systems kicked in. "Hull integrity at 40%, called out engineering. We need to surface for repairs." The crew was exhausted. Their ship was damaged, but they'd done it. They'd found a way to turn the aliens' own technology against them. As they limped back to their hidden base for repairs, the crew watched the alien fleet retreat once again. This time, though, the victory felt different. They'd learned something important today. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to be stronger, but to be smarter. They had survived the counterattack, but everyone knew the aliens would be back. And next time, they'd be even better prepared. The real question was, would humanity be ready for whatever came next? The repair bay hummed with activity as engineers worked around the clock to fix the battle damage. The human earthquake battleship's hull bore the scars of its recent encounters, but something more important was happening in the research lab above. Commander Tanaka stood surrounded by holographic displays showing fragments recovered from the destroyed alien ships. Most of them were tiny crystals, unlike any material found on Earth. They sparkled with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm. "Watch this," said the chief scientist, carefully placing one of the crystal fragments in a testing chamber. He activated a low-frequency seismic pulse, barely stronger than a whisper. The crystal's glow intensified immediately, responding to the vibration. The whole team leaned in closer. They'd been studying these fragments for days, trying to understand why their attacks had been so effective against the alien ships. Now they were starting to see the bigger picture. "Their entire technology is based on crystalline structures," the scientist explained, his voice filled with excitement. "Their ships, their weapons, even their shields, it's all connected through these crystals. That's why they're so vulnerable to certain frequencies." The discovery sparked a flurry of activity. Teams of researchers began testing different seismic patterns, watching how the crystals responded. Each frequency created a unique reaction, like playing notes on an invisible instrument. One test particularly caught everyone's attention. When exposed to a specific harmonic frequency, a crystal not only glowed but began to resonate so strongly it nearly shattered. The implications were huge. "It's like hitting the right note to break a wine glass," someone said, "but on a massive scale." The crew gathered around the test chambers, watching in fascination as they learned more about their adversary's technological weakness. But the aliens weren't sitting idle. Long-range sensors showed them regrouping, their remaining ships clustering in unusual formations. They were clearly planning something big, and Earth needed to be ready. The research team worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the urgency of their mission. They created a detailed map of crystal frequencies, identifying patterns that could disrupt alien systems without completely destroying them. "We don't want to shatter their ships," Commander Tanaka reminded her team. "The goal is to disable them, force them to retreat. Complete destruction could release energies we don't understand yet." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young technician who used to repair musical instruments noticed something about the crystal readings. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to a display. "It's like a chord progression. These frequencies work together." She was right. The crystals didn't just respond to single frequencies. They reacted to combinations of waves, creating complex harmonies of energy. It was beautiful in a way, like discovering the music of an alien civilization. Testing moved from the lab to the training pool, where they could safely experiment with larger-scale effects. The results were beyond anything they'd hoped for. By precisely tuning their seismic waves, they could create resonance patterns that bypassed alien shields completely. But implementing this discovery wouldn't be easy. The battleship's wave generators needed significant modifications to produce such precise frequencies. Engineers worked in shifts, adjusting equipment that had never been designed for such delicate control. The crew practiced the new techniques relentlessly. It was like learning to play a new instrument, but one that could save the planet. They had to get it perfect. There would be no second chances in real combat. Meanwhile, reports came in from space observers. The alien fleet was changing, their ships combining into larger formations. They were adapting to, preparing for what would surely be their biggest attack yet. Time was running out. The modifications weren't complete, and the crew was still mastering the new techniques. But everyone could feel it. They were on the verge of something revolutionary. They had found not just a weakness in the alien technology, but perhaps a key to understanding it. As Commander Tanaka watched her team prepare for the coming battle, she realized something important. This wasn't just about winning a war anymore. They were making first contact in the truest sense, learning to speak the language of an alien civilization through the fundamental forces of nature itself. The final battle was coming, and now they had a real chance. Not just to survive, but to change the course of human history. The question was, would they be ready in time? The Mariana Trench was the perfect place for humanity's last stand. The deepest point on Earth, where the pressure could crush almost anything except the human earthquake battleship and the alien fleet now hovering above it. Commander Tanaka stood at her station, feeling the familiar hum of the ship's systems through the neural interface. But today was different. Today, they weren't alone. Around the world, smaller seismic generators had been positioned at key points along the Earth's tectonic plates. "All stations report ready," came the voice over the global command channel. Every major fault line was now equipped with technology based on their discoveries. The planet itself had become their ally in this final battle. The alien fleet appeared suddenly, their massive ships breaking through the clouds like an artificial storm. But this time, they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they formed a perfect circle above the trench, their formations suggesting they were preparing for something big. "They're charging some kind of combined weapon," reported the sensor officer. The energy readings were off the charts, suggesting the aliens were pooling their resources for one massive strike. Commander Tanaka took a deep breath. Everything they'd learned about the crystal technology, every practice session with the new frequency patterns, had led to this moment. "Begin synchronized wave sequence," she ordered. The battleship's generators spun up, creating carefully tuned seismic waves that rippled through the ocean. Around the world, the other generators activated in perfect harmony. The water began to glow with strange patterns as the frequencies aligned. The aliens struck first, their combined weapon sending a beam of incredible power into the ocean. But this time, the battleship didn't try to dodge. Instead, they used the energy of the attack itself, letting it feed into their resonance pattern. "Pattern matching successful," called out the science officer. "The crystal harmonics are responding." The alien ship's hulls began to shimmer with unexpected light as their own technology turned against them. The battle became a symphony of energy and waves. Each seismic generator added its own note to the complex harmony they were creating. The ocean itself seemed to sing as the frequencies built upon each other. But the aliens weren't giving up. Their ships began to move in complex patterns, trying to break free of the resonance field. Energy weapons fired randomly into the water, creating chaos in the carefully tuned wave patterns. "Maintaining synchronization is critical," Tanaka reminded her crew. "Stay focused." The entire ship vibrated as they pushed their systems to the limit, fighting to keep the complex frequency pattern stable. Around the world, people watched their instruments as the seismic activity grew stronger. The waves weren't destructive. They were too precisely controlled for that, but everyone could feel the power building. The turning point came when the first alien ship's crystal core began to overload. Its shields flickered with rainbow colors as the resonance pattern forced its technology to vibrate at frequencies it was never designed to handle. "They're trying to retreat," someone shouted as the alien vessels began to break formation. But they couldn't escape the web of harmonics that now surrounded the Earth. Each generator added to the effect, creating a globe-spanning network of crystal-disrupting waves. The alien fleet's perfect circle collapsed into chaos. Ships collided as their control systems failed, their crystal cores pulsing with unstable energy. Yet remarkably, none of them exploded. The frequencies were disrupting their systems without destroying them completely. Commander Tanaka watched as the massive alien vessels began to rise, fleeing toward space. Their retreat wasn't graceful. Their ships moved like wounded animals, their once perfect formation now scattered and broken. As the last alien ship disappeared into the upper atmosphere, a cheer went up from control centers around the world. They had done it. Humanity had defended itself not through destruction, but through understanding. The human earthquake battleship surfaced slowly, its crew exhausted but triumphant. Looking up at the sky where the alien fleet had vanished, Commander Tanaka realized something important. They hadn't just won a battle, they'd sent a message. The message was clear. Earth wasn't helpless. Humans could stand up to advanced technology and find creative ways to defend themselves. More importantly, they had shown they could do it without destroying their attackers completely. As the sun set on this historic day, the crew knew that everything had changed. Humanity had proven itself ready to join the wider galaxy. And if the aliens ever returned, they would find not just a planet ready to defend itself, but perhaps a civilization ready to communicate in new ways through the very forces that shaped their world. The human earthquake battleship had done more than protect Earth. It had opened the door to humanity's future among the stars.